"That map is wrong," said the maid, "and if you send men to that pass on the strength of it, your grace, you will lose them all, and start a war besides." And the Duke of Marchwood, who had been staring at that very map for 3 sleepless nights, turned so fast he knocked over his chair. He had not known she was there. Betsy Cole was the housemaid who cleaned his study at dawn, before the household woke, and the Duke had been up all night again over the maps, and had not heard her come in, and she had not meant to speak. A housemaid does not speak, least of all to correct a duke on a matter of state. But she had glanced at the great map spread on his table as she laid the fire, and what she saw had jumped out of her mouth before her sense could stop it, because Betsy Cole could not bear to see a thing that wrong and say nothing, any more than she could bear to leave a fire unlaid or a floor unswept. "I beg your pardon, your grace," she said at once, going white, understanding what she had done. "I forgot myself. It is not my place. I will go." "You will not go," said the Duke of Marchwood, righting his chair. His tiredness burned off in an instant. "You will stay exactly where you are, and you will tell me what you meant. You said the map is wrong. That map, girl, was drawn by the finest cartographers in the kingdom, at the order of the War Office, and I have staked 3 nights and a great deal more than that on it. You are the housemaid, and you have just told me it is wrong, and will lose an army and start a war. So you will not go. You will explain which pass, and why, and how in God's name a housemaid comes to have an opinion on the disposition of troops along the northern border." And Betsy Cole, seeing that the Duke was not angry, but fiercely, urgently attentive, took a breath and explained. "Because I am from there, your grace," she said. "The northern border, the Averill Valley, the very ground on that map. I was born there, and lived there till I was 15, and walked every inch of it my whole childhood. And I am telling you that the map is wrong, not a little wrong, badly wrong, in the one place that matters. It shows the Averill Pass here," she pointed, not quite daring to touch the great map, "running clear through the mountains, wide enough for a column, a good road to the border. And there is no such pass. There never was. There is a track that looks like a pass on the maps because a surveyor 40 years ago mistook a shepherd's path for a road and drew it so, and every map since has copied him, because map makers copy each other, and none of them has walked it. But I have walked it, your grace, 100 times, and it is not a pass. It is a dead end, a narrow track that climbs into a box canyon under a cliff and stops. If you send a column through it expecting to reach the border, they will march into a canyon with cliffs on 3 sides, and no way out, strung along a track too narrow to turn a wagon, and if the enemy holds the heights above, which they will, it is the obvious place. Your men will be trapped in the bottom of a stone bottle and slaughtered to the last, and there will be nothing you can do, because there is no way out but the way in, and the way in will be blocked behind them. That is what the map does not show, and there is worse." "Worse," said the Duke of Marchwood, who had gone very still. "Worse," Betsy said. "The map draws the border along the ridge above that false pass, puts the whole valley on our side of the line, and it is not. The true border, the one the border folk have honored for 100 years, runs along the river, a mile south, which puts that valley on their side. The map makers drew the border along the ridge because they drew the false pass and had to put the line somewhere sensible, and it has been wrong on every map for 40 years. So when you send your men up that valley to defend the border, your grace, you will not be defending our border at all. You will be marching an army a mile into their territory, over ground that has been theirs for a century, which they will quite rightly take as an invasion, and which will give them every justification to answer with force. And that is how you start a war over a border that is not where your map says it is, by sending troops to defend ground that was never yours, into a pass that does not exist, where they will die for a cartographer's 40-year-old mistake. That is why I said the map is wrong, and that if you act on it, you will lose your men and start a war. I am only a housemaid, your grace, and I ought not to have spoken, but I could not stand here and lay your fire and watch you plan to march an army into a box canyon over a false border and say nothing, because I know that ground, and the map does not, and men would die of it." The Duke of Marchwood stood in the dawn light and looked at the housemaid who had just, in the space of 3 minutes, overturned the entire strategic assessment that the War Office and its finest cartographers and the Duke himself had spent weeks constructing, and felt the floor of his certainty drop away, because everything she said had the unmistakable ring of ground truth, the specific detailed knowledge of someone who had actually walked the terrain the mapmakers had only copied, and because it explained a dozen small things about the intelligence that had been quietly troubling him for nights without his being able to say why. "Show me," he said, and pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her and put a pencil in her hand, a housemaid, in a Duke's study at dawn, and said, "Draw it, the valley as it truly is, the real pass or the false one, the true border, the river, the heights, all of it, as you walked it. Draw me the ground the mapmakers got wrong. Draw it now, Betsy Cole, and if it is as you say, then you have this morning saved an army and prevented a war, and a great many men will owe their lives to a housemaid who could not bear to lay a fire in silence." She drew it that dawn, and as her hand moved across the paper, the Duke of Marchwood asked her, quietly, how she had come to be a housemaid in his London house, so far from the border valley she knew so well. And the story she told, in pieces, as she drew, was the story of every wasted gift. She had been born, she said, the daughter of a border shepherd, the youngest of many, in a hard, poor family, on a hard, poor holding in the Averill Valley, and she had been, from her earliest childhood, the odd one, for where the other children saw only the hills they lived among, Betsy saw the ground, saw it whole, saw how it fit together, saw the logic of water and slope and cover, the way other children saw the alphabet, without being taught. She had drawn maps in the dirt as a small child, accurate ones, of country she had walked. She had known, at 7, which way the weather would come, and where the strayed sheep would shelter, and how the drovers should rout the flock, better than the grown men. She had a gift, plainly, an unmistakable one, and it had been, in a shepherd's daughter, entirely useless, worse than useless, a thing that marked her as strange. A girl with a head full of maps, her mother had said, despairing. And what good is that to anyone? You cannot eat a map. You cannot marry a map. Keep your strange notions to yourself, Betsy, and learn to spin, for no man wants a wife who corrects the drovers. And Betsy had learned to hide the gift, because it brought her nothing but the reputation of an odd girl, and had grown up hiding it. And when the hard times came, and the family could no longer feed all its children, Betsy, being clever and capable if strange, had been sent into service, first locally and then, at last, to London, to be a housemaid in a great house, her useless gift for ground packed away entirely, of no more use to a London housemaid than to a border shepherd's daughter, a curiosity she had carried her whole life and never once been able to spend. "So you see, Your Grace," she said, finishing the map, "the true valley, drawn with a clarity that would have graced any atlas. It has never been good for anything, my gift, in 23 years. It made me an odd child and a stranger girl, and it has sat in my head all this while, like a tool for a trade that does not exist, a thing I could do brilliantly, and no one on earth had any use for. I had stopped even thinking of it, mostly. A housemaid does not need to know how an army should be disposed along a border. And then I came to lay your fire, and saw your map, and the old useless gift woke up all at once and would not be silent, because here, for the first time in my life, was a thing my strange head was actually made for, a map that was wrong in a way I could see and no one else could, and men's lives hanging on it. It was the first time, Your Grace, in 23 years, that the thing I can do was of any use to anyone at all. That is why I could not keep silent, not only because men would die, because for one moment my useless gift was useful, and I could not bear to swallow it back down, and go on being the odd girl with the head full of maps that no one wants." And the Duke of Marchwood, looking at the perfect map and the housemaid who had drawn it, understood that he was witnessing the exact thing his whole rank-bound world was built to prevent from ever being witnessed. A first-rate genius, born in the wrong body and the wrong station, that would have gone to its grave entirely unknown and unused, that had very nearly done so, but for the accident of a dawn, a study, an unlaid fire, and a girl who could not, at the last, keep silent. And he resolved, even then, before he knew he loved her, that Betsy Cole's gift would not go back into hiding, that whatever it cost, the odd girl with the head full of maps would be, at last, of use, and known to be, because a kingdom that would throw away a mind like this to save its own comfortable assumptions did not deserve the peace her mind could win it, and he would not let it. She drew it, and it was not merely accurate. It was a work of such clarity and such strategic insight that the Duke of Marchwood understood, watching her hand move, that he was in the presence of a natural genius, the equal of any general he had served with. For Betsy Cole did not merely correct the terrain. As she drew, the true pass and the false, the river border, the heights, she talked, and the talk revealed a mind that saw the ground the way great commanders see it, not as lines on paper, but as a living problem of advantage and danger, choke point and killing ground, cover and supply. She showed him not only where the map was wrong but what followed from it, where an enemy would naturally position, where the real defensible line lay, how a force should actually be disposed to hold the true border along the river, which heights commanded which valleys, where a small force could hold against a large one, and where a large one would be helpless. She had no training, no schooling, no vocabulary of war. She called the choke point the neck where the sheep bunch, and the killing ground the bad hollow. But the thinking underneath the homely words was pure strategic genius, the innate spatial and tactical brilliance of a mind that would, in a man of rank, have made a great general, and that had been born instead into a borderland shepherd's daughter and put to cleaning grates. The Duke of Marchwood verified it, of course. He was not a man to stake an army on a housemaid's word, however convincing. He sent a trusted officer north, quietly, to walk the Averill Valley, and the officer returned in a fortnight, white-faced with confirmation. The pass was false, exactly as she had said, a box canyon that would have been the grave of any column sent through it. The border was misdrawn, the true line a mile south along the river. The whole planned operation would have been a catastrophe, an army lost and a war begun, precisely as the housemaid had foretold. Every word of it was true. Betsy Cole, who cleaned the study at dawn, had seen in 3 minutes what the War Office had missed for weeks, and had been right, and had saved an army and averted a war. And the Duke of Marchwood did a thing that scandalized his household and his colleagues both. He began to consult her. Not openly at first. The world was not ready for a duke taking strategic counsel from a housemaid. But he had her brought to his study in the evenings, on the pretext of some domestic errand, and he spread his maps and his intelligence before her, and he asked her what she saw, and she told him, and she was, again and again, right, seeing the flaws in plans that trained men had approved, the dangers in dispositions that looked sound on paper, the elegant simple solutions that the schooled minds, tangled in doctrine, had missed. For Betsy Cole's genius was not merely her local knowledge of one valley, that had only been the door through which the Duke glimpsed it. It was a general genius for the thing itself, for terrain, for advantage, for the spatial logic of force and ground. And once he began to consult it, he could not stop, because it was better than any counsel he had, and a man responsible for armies does not turn away the best mind he can find, because it belongs to a housemaid. And in the consulting, over the evenings of maps and problems, the Duke of Marchwood and Betsy Cole came to know each other, and to more than know each other. For there is a particular intimacy in two minds working a hard problem together as equals, and across the maps, in the working, the rank fell away, and the Duke found himself talking to Betsy not as a master to a servant, but as one keen mind to another, arguing, testing, delighting in her insight, starved as he was for a mind that could match his own, and finding it, of all places, in the girl who laid his fire. And Betsy, for her part, found in the Duke the first person in her whole life who had ever valued the strange gift she had always had and always hidden, the seeing of ground that had marked her as odd in her village, that had no use for a shepherd's daughter or a housemaid, that she had carried her whole life as a useless curiosity, and now, suddenly, found prized, sought, needed by a duke for the defense of the kingdom. To be valued for the very thing that had made her strange was intoxicating, and she fell, over the evenings of maps, in love with the man who valued it, as he fell, over the same maps, in love with the mind that no one but he had ever seen. There was one evening among the many that the Duke kept, ever after, as the moment he understood exactly what he had found. They had been working late over a particularly vicious problem, a supply route through hostile country that 3 of the War Office's best had declared impossible, and Betsy had been silent a long while, frowning at the map, and then she had taken the pencil and traced, without a word, a route none of the trained men had seen. Not the obvious road, which was indeed impossible, but a longer, stranger way, following the lie of the land, the rivers and the ridges, that no one schooled in roads and distances would ever have found, because it ignored the roads entirely and thought only of the ground. And the Duke had looked at it and seen at once that it would work, that it was in fact brilliant, elegant, unanswerable, and had felt the particular joy he had been starved of his whole professional life, the joy of a mind meeting a better one. "How do you do it?" he asked her. "Truly, Betsy, men who have studied war their whole lives could not find that route. You found it in 10 minutes, and you have never studied anything. How?" Betsy considered the question seriously, in her borderland way. "I do not think in roads," she said. "That is the whole of it, I think, though it is hard to explain. The schooled men think in roads and distances and lines, because that is what they were taught. They look at ground and see a map, the thing on the paper. And I never learned the map, so I never learned to see it. I see the ground. When I look at this," she touched the paper, "I do not see lines. I see the valley, the wet places and the dry, where the water runs, and where the sheep would go, and where a man on the heights could see you coming, and where he couldn't, because that is how I learned to look at ground before I ever saw a map, as a shepherd's child, walking it, needing to know where the flock could pass, and where the wolf could hide, and where the weather would come from. I learned ground the way you learn a face, from living in it, not from a drawing of it. And so when I look at your maps, I see past the drawing to the ground underneath, and the drawing's mistakes jump out at me, because I am not looking at the drawing at all. I am looking at the country. That is not cleverness, Your Grace. It is only that I learned to see the thing itself before anyone taught me to see the picture of it, and the picture never got between me and the truth, the way it does for the schooled men. It is why the false past jumped out at me the first morning. You all saw the map. I saw the box canyon, because I had stood in it." And the Duke of Marchwood understood, listening, that he was in the presence not merely of talent, but of a rare and specific kind of genius, the genius of the mind that sees the thing itself and not the received picture of it, the mind that is a danger to every comfortable error, precisely because it never learned to defer to the map, and that such a mind, in a man of birth, would have been trained up into a great commander, and had been born instead into a shepherd's daughter, and would have been wasted entirely on grates and fires but for the accident of a dawn and an unlaid silence. "You should have been a general," he said, and meant it. "If you had been born a man of rank, Betsy Cole, they would have made you a general, and you would have been the finest of the age. It is the plainest waste I have ever seen. A mind like yours set to cleaning studies, because it was born in the wrong body and the wrong station. It is a crime, is what it is. The kingdom has been the poorer, all these years, for every hour your gift spent laying fires instead of shaping campaigns, and did not even know what it was throwing away. The kingdom throws away a great many minds, Your Grace," Betsy said, without bitterness. "Only fact. Mine is one. There are others, clever poor children by the thousand, in villages and sculleries all over England, born with gifts the world will never look for, because it has decided that genius lives only in the well-born. I am not special in having the gift. I am only lucky in having, this once, a duke who happened to overhear it. For every housemaid who fixes a map, there are 100 who never get the chance to speak, and whose gifts die with them unused, and the world calls them ordinary because it never troubled to look. That is the waste, Your Grace. Not me alone, but all of us. All the hidden minds the world discards for want of the right birth." And the Duke of Marchwood, hearing her, resolved two things in that moment that would shape the rest of both their lives: that he would see Betsy Cole's own gift honored, whatever it cost, and that he would spend his fortune, with her, hunting the other hidden mines the world threw away, a resolve that grew, though he did not yet know it, out of the same evening in which he first admitted to himself that he loved her. There was a difficulty, and it was not only the gulf of rank. It was that the Duke could not openly credit her. He was using a housemaid's strategic genius to shape the defense of the northern border, and the world, the War Office, his colleagues, society, would never accept it, would laugh him out of his position if it were known that the Duke of Marchwood took his counsel from the girl who cleaned his grates. So her genius had to stay hidden, her contributions passed off as his own, her name kept out of it entirely. And this galled the Duke, who was an honest man, more with every passing week, because Betsy Cole had saved an army, and was saving more, and no one would ever know it, and she would go to her grave an anonymous housemaid, while the credit for her genius accrued silently to him. It came to a head over exactly that injustice, in the way these things do. For a moment arrived when Betsy's insight produced something too large to hide, a complete reassessment of the border defense, elegant and decisive, that the Duke presented to the War Office, and that was hailed as the finest strategic thinking in a generation, the work that secured the northern frontier and averted the war for good. And the Duke of Marchwood stood in the War Office receiving the praise of the kingdom's greatest men for a stroke of genius that was not his, that belonged to a housemaid kept anonymous in his study, and found that he could not bear it, that to accept the credit for Betsy Cole's genius one more time was a lie too large for an honest man to tell, and that he would rather scandalize the whole War Office than let the woman he loved be robbed of her due for the rest of her life. He did it plainly, and at cost, because that was the only honest way. He did not blurt it out in the War Office in a way that could be dismissed as eccentricity. He did it deliberately, with proof, the way a man builds an unanswerable case. He went to the most senior men, the ones who had praised the border reassessment as the finest strategic thinking in a generation, and he told them the truth, that the thinking was not his, that the flaw in the original map, the false pass, the misdrawn border that would have lost an army and begun a war, had been caught not by the War Office's cartographers, but by a housemaid from the Averill Valley named Betsy Cole, that the reassessment they had hailed was substantially her work, her insight, her genius for terrain, worked out across his study table over many evenings, that he had concealed it because the world would not credit a housemaid, and that he had come, at last, to find the concealment intolerable, because it was a lie, and because it robbed a woman of extraordinary gifts, of the recognition those gifts had earned in the saving of the kingdom. They did not believe him, at first. Of course they did not. The idea was absurd, a housemaid with the strategic genius of a great general. And so, the Duke of Marchwood did the thing that could not be argued with. He proposed a test. Let them bring Betsy Cole before them, not told what to expect, given no warning, and lay before her a strategic problem, a real one of the hard ones the War Office was currently wrestling with, and let her solve it in front of them, and then let them judge for themselves whether the housemaid's genius was a duke's eccentric fancy or the plain astonishing truth. They agreed, half to humor him, half to expose what they assumed was some delusion or deception, and Betsy Cole was brought before the assembled senior men of the War Office, terrified, in her housemaid's dress, understanding that the Duke had staked his whole credit on her, and a map was laid before her, and a problem posed, a genuine strategic tangle the finest trained minds in the room had been unable to resolve. And Betsy Cole looked at it, in her plain dress, with her homely borderland words, and solved it, not merely adequately, but brilliantly, seeing in minutes what the trained men had missed for weeks, laying out with her shepherd's daughter vocabulary, a solution so clear and so obviously right that the room fell silent, and then erupted, because there was no denying what they had just witnessed. A natural genius for war of the very first rank, housed, by the accident of birth, in a border shepherd's daughter who cleaned grates, and revealed to them by a duke, honest enough to give her the credit. It changed everything, not all at once, For the world does not remake its assumptions in a day, but decisively. The War Office could not, having seen what it saw, go back to pretending the housemaid's genius was the Duke's. The proof was too public and too complete. And so Betsy Cole became, quietly at first, and then more openly as her value proved itself again and again, a thing that had no precedent. A woman of no birth whose strategic counsel was sought by the highest men in the kingdom, consulted, through the Duke, who remained her sponsor and her champion, on the hardest problems of the realm's defense. Her genius no longer hidden but harnessed, her homely words on terrain and advantage carrying weight in rooms that had never before admitted a woman, let alone a servant. It was irregular. It scandalized the traditionalists. But results are results, and a kingdom at war does not, in the end, refuse the best strategic mind it has, because that mind belongs to a housemaid, not when a Duke of Marchwood's standing has staked his credit on her and been proved right before the whole War Office. And in the midst of it, the Duke of Marchwood did the other honest thing he had been putting off. "I have credited you before the War Office," he said to her, "because it was the truth, and I could not go on stealing it. And now I find I must tell you another truth I have been stealing from myself, which is harder, because it risks a great deal more than my professional credit. Betsy, I did not begin consulting you out of love. I began because you had the best strategic mind I had ever encountered, and I would have been a fool to waste it. That was the beginning, your genius, and my need of it. But somewhere across all those evenings of maps, working beside you, arguing with you, watching that extraordinary mind of yours take apart problems that had defeated trained generals, somewhere in there I stopped consulting a housemaid and started loving a woman, the whole of her. Not only the genius, but the courage and the honesty, and the borderland bluntness, and the way you could not bear to lay a fire in silence while men marched to their deaths. I love you, Betsy Cole. Not your gift alone, you, entirely. And I know what I am, and what you are, and how the world will shriek at a duke marrying his housemaid. And I find, weighed against the thought of losing you, that I do not care what the world shrieks. The same world that would have marched an army into a box canyon but for you, and has no right to an opinion on anything, least of all on the woman who saved it. Marry me, not as my housemaid, not as my secret advisor, but as my wife, and my equal, and the finest mind in the kingdom, openly, before everyone. Will you?" And Betsy Cole, shepherd's daughter, housemaid, hidden genius, looked at the Duke who had not only loved her, but done the far rarer thing, credited her, given her genius to the world at cost to himself, and understood that she was loved in the one way that mattered most to a person whose gift had always been hidden, loved by someone who had made sure she was seen. "You gave me the credit," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. She who never wept. "That is the thing, Your Grace. Julian, that is the thing I cannot get past. Loving me is one matter, but you stood up in the War Office, before the greatest men in the kingdom, and staked your whole credit on a housemaid, and told them the genius they praised was mine, when you could have kept it, and kept your dignity, and kept me a secret in your study forever. No one has ever, in my whole life, wanted me to be seen. I was the odd girl in the village, with the useless gift for ground. I was the housemaid who ought to keep her eyes down. I have spent my whole life hiding the one remarkable thing about me, because the world had no place for it. And you dragged it into the light, at your own cost, and made them see it, and made them value it. You gave me, not just love, but recognition, which I had never dared even to want. How could I not love you? You are the first person who ever wanted the world to know what I am." She took his hands. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, and I will go on solving your wars, and scandalizing your War Office, and saying the bad hollow, instead of whatever the proper word is, for the rest of my life, and you may explain to society as best you can why the Duke of Marchwood married his housemaid, and I do not care one whit what they make of it, because you cared enough to make them see me, and that is worth more than all the dignity in England. Yes." And the Duke of Marchwood took the housemaid whose genius had saved the kingdom into his arms, and married her openly, and never once let the world forget whose mind it had to thank for the peace of the northern border. They were married that year, And it was, predictably, the scandal of the season, and then, less predictably, its triumph. For society, which began by shrieking at a duke marrying his housemaid, was gradually silenced by the sheer undeniable fact of what Betsy was, as her strategic genius went on proving itself in the councils of the kingdom, until even the traditionalists were forced to concede that the Duke of Marchwood had not married beneath him at all, but had married one of the finest minds in the realm, who happened, by an accident of birth, to have been cleaning his grates when he found her. The Duchess of Marchwood became, in time, one of the strange wonders of the age, a woman of no birth whose counsel shaped the defense of the kingdom, consulted by generals and ministers, her homely borderland words on ground and advantage carrying weight in the highest councils, her genius no longer hidden but honored. She never lost the bluntness, or the borderland vocabulary, or the shepherd's daughter clarity that saw straight through the tangles the schooled minds tied themselves in. And she used her extraordinary position for one cause above all others, the finding and the raising of other hidden minds, the clever poor, the gifted overlooked, the genius born into the wrong station and set to cleaning grates, all the wasted brilliance that the world discarded for want of the right birth. She had an unerring eye for it, having been it, and she and the Duke endowed schools and sought out gifted children of no fortune and gave them the education their birth would have denied them, because Betsy Cole knew, better than anyone alive, exactly how much genius the world threw away by refusing to look for it in the low places, and she meant to waste as little of it as she could reach. "You could not bear to lay a fire in silence," the Duke said to her once, years on, watching her explain a point of strategy to a general who had learned, at last, to listen. That is the whole of how it began. A housemaid, who could not watch a duke plan a disaster and say nothing. If you had held your tongue that morning, as a housemaid is supposed to hold her tongue, an army would have died in a box canyon, and a war would have begun, and I would never have known what you were, and you would have cleaned my grates for 40 years, and gone to your grave the odd girl with the useless gift. It all turned on your not being able to keep silent. It is a great fault in me, Betsy agreed, with the dry borderland humor he had loved across 10,000 maps. The not keeping silent, my mother despaired of it. But I have come to think, Julian, that it is the most important thing about me, and perhaps about anyone, that when you see a thing that is wrong, and know it is wrong, and know that men will suffer for it, you speak, whatever your place, whatever the cost, because the alternative is to let the wrong stand out of deference, and deference has never once in the history of the world saved an army from a box canyon. I spoke. It was not my place, and it saved a kingdom, and won me a life I could never have dreamed of. So I will tell our children what my mother never told me. Speak. When you see the map is wrong, speak. Whoever you are, whatever your station, however far above you the man holding the map. The world is full of box canyons drawn as passes, and full of people who see the truth and keep silent out of deference. And the whole art of being useful in this world is to be the one who cannot keep silent. It cost me nothing but a moment's fear, and it bought me everything. Speak. It is the only advice I have, and it is the best there is.